Okay, so I want to welcome my colleague and friend, Dr. Pam Atkins. Hello, Dr. Atkins.
Hi, good
Um,
evening.
Good
Hello to
evening.
everyone. Glad to be here.
How's your day going?
Oh, very, very nice. Very nice. Just trying to get going for the week.
Yeah, so as you heard, we're going to have a nice discussion on this very fascinating area of medicine. And we have with us tonight a very special guest, Dr. Janice von Knox. Dr. Knox is a board certified anesthesiologist, endocrinologist, and a certified cannabinoid medicine specialist. She is one of a family of four clinicians that believe science, research, and technology will disrupt healthcare as it has been known. The future of cannabis medicine will depend on how well the physiology of the body is known and the correct clinical application of pharmacology of cannabis and other botanicals is utilized. Welcome to the show, Dr. Knox. How are you doing this evening?
I'm wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Montgomery, and nice to be here with you, Dr. Atkins, as well. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you here. And the thing is that it's a mouthful to pronounce endocrinologist, but I think I've gotten pretty good with it.
You did great. You did great. You did absolutely fantastic.
We've had a number of conversations over, I think it's been well over a year, maybe a year and a half. And I'm always fascinated by, the insight that you share with me about this topic. And I like in your bio, it's important to understand the physiology of the body. We in medical school and also in our practice, we look at health care from the standpoint of a disease state, and we use labels, the diabetic and the hypertensive and the heart failure patient and so on. But below these so-called diseases or chronic illnesses or whatever labels we want to give them, is a physiology, and we would refer to it as a pathophysio, patho meaning abnormal or pathological disease state. But there's an abnormal physiology that we refer to as a pathophysiology. But then there's a normal physiology that if we really understand those two in context, we can then say, okay, why is this pathophysiology existing? What's out of balance? And what do we need to do to bring pathophysiology into physiology? And so even in your bio, it speaks to the necessity of our perspective. Our perspective in the way we practice medicine is wrong in the sense that we're looking at the superficial aspect and really the outward manifestations of this pathophysiology. And so it's very refreshing to hear you say that. Now, it's as we did for those who did not join us last week. Can you give us a little blurb on a little bit of a history we got here? There's some people understand Carnegie and Rockefeller and give us a quick blurb on that history for those who missed last week, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the history is so important because it tells us where we've been to where we are today and hopefully where we are to go tomorrow, right? It gives us a context to build a different paradigm when it comes to delivering healthcare. But as we all know, cannabis has been used for thousands and thousands of years and made its first way into Western medicine in 1837, brought by William O'Shaughnessy to England and then to the American colonies, and was widely used in the early mid 1800s to the mid 1900s. Widely used, but there was always some pushback toward this medicine, whether it was spiritual or from government agencies. There was always some pushback. But with that being said, it was widely used in America during that time. 50% of all drugs used both pharmaceutical prescriptions as well as over the counter. But there were some nails beginning to be hammered into that cannabis coffin, right? No predictable results, no constancy in the ingredients and how you store it. And so when they moved toward single molecular medicines like aspirin and penicillin, that became a nail in the coffin. And then moving further on into the US history toward the 30s, and we saw lots of pushback. And I want to say it's not because of cannabis itself, which we in America knew as cannabis, but it was because of hemp. You had industrialists like Carnegie and Rockefeller and William Randolph Hearst and Lamont DuPont wanting to get rid of this hemp plant that would disrupt so many of their industries, right? The paper, the textile, the oil, the fuels, disrupt so many industries. So they had a vested interest in getting rid of hemp. And it just so happened the Mexican-American War occurred, and so there was a bias against Mexicans who brought smokable marijuana across the border. They didn't smoke it before, it was all tinctures and oils, but they used the Mexicans and then the blacks to demonize this plant and to put fear in the American people so they could get rid of hemp. And I do want to say at the time, in 1937, when they were trying to pass this Marijuana Stamp Act, the AMA had a representative, and he was not only a lawyer and a physician, but he was an expert in drug policy, right? He testified that there was no danger to this medicine. It did have medicinal benefits and needed to be studied. They totally disregarded Dr. William Woodward's testimony, totally disregarded it, and passed this Marijuana Stamp Act that put a huge tax burden on physician deliverers, pharmacists, and the grower. And then it was, of course, the onerous paperwork. And finally, to be kicked off the American Pharmacopoeia Act. Now, going on in the 60s is when we first got the first chemical structure for some of the major components of the cannabis plant. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in the 70s, it was enacted that no American university could do research on a cannabis plant. No American, and that was a huge, big blow to cannabis research. No American university. But in 1963, Dr. Raphael Mashula out of Israel gave us the chemical structure, the CBD. In 1964, he gave us the chemical structure of THC, alpha-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. It was with a synthetic isomer that they were able to radioactively tag the synthetic drug off the structure that was being built, right? Because you could not do research on a real plant. So they made a synthetic isomer, radio tagged it, and then just sat back and saw where these molecules worked. And what lit up
that's how they mapped the endocannabinoid system too, with the radioactive tag.
Exactly right. What lit up in the brain in high dense numbers, more than all the other neurotransmitter systems combined, was this new neural receptor that no one had previously identified. And it was called the CB1 receptor, named after cannabinoids. Now that's the first receptor, and that was in 1989. 1992, they came with a second receptor, and then the ligands that work on those receptors and the enzymes that create and break them down. Now that's a classical description of the endocannabinoid system. The CB1, CB2 receptor, the two neurotransmitters or ligands, as you call them, or endocannabinoids, because they're made within our body, anandamide and 2-AG, and then the enzymes that create and break them down. That's the classical description. And the 1990s, in fact, was called the decade of the brain because no research, the volume, the amount of research done on the brain had never been done before previously. So they called the 90s the decade of the brain when they uncovered this amazing neurotransmitter system. The CB1 receptor is a neuromodulating receptor found primarily in the brain, in the central nervous system. The CB2 receptor is an immunomodulating receptor found in the peripheral tissues, like the thymus and the tonsils and the appendix. So these are the main receptors.
So you said something that I really want to nail down, and this concept of single molecular medicine.
Yeah.
So the thing is that, and as we get into the science of the endocannabinoid system, and really, I mean, we're going to be focused on the science of cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. But as you have pointed out to me in other conversations, your daughter did one of your daughters did a great job on a TED Talk about how many other aspects of healthy living stimulate the endocannabinoid system. We're going to touch on that as well. But I want to, for a minute, ask you to talk about this single molecular medicine and then contrast that with the actual power of cannabis and any other potential plant in terms of its more complete molecular because it's a plant. There are things about it that we know about it and many things we don't know about it. But
That's
then we
correct.
substitute that, something that's complete, with something that's a single molecule that we take out of context, and we try to use that in health, and that's what's dominating what we do today. Help
Exactly.
our audience kind of understand that, because we
Yeah.
think of a pill, this medicine does this, that, and the other, but you're dealing with a single molecule that's supposed to do something in a very complex system that we don't understand, compared to a very complex molecular structure that we don't fully understand that's made for that system. Help us out with that,
Oh, yeah.
understanding the concept.
Gladly, gladly. Well, let me talk about the cannabis plant itself. It has over 400 pharmacoactive ingredients. It's really a little polypharmacy. And everything that's put in that plant is what we call full spectrum, every ingredient that's there. And those different components sort of modulate the other components. You don't need one of them to work, but all of them work better together than separately. Now, when you get to single molecular medicines, all of them, for the most part, are ripped off of nature's plant, including aspirin that comes from the white willow bark tree. So it's a rip off of nature. So the further you get away from what's natural, the more you begin to see what I call the side effects of a drug. Because when the plant makes something, it makes stuff that works together, that works and binds together, right? And when you take one thing out and isolate it, what it does is totally different from what it was intended to do, because it's working in isolation. And we actually have graphs that show that when you do that, you narrow that window of safety for that product, instead of using the whole product that widens that window of safety. So you're narrowing down that window of safety when you use a single molecular medicine. So it's this bell-shaped curve that broadens when you use a multi-pharmaceutical or polychemical plant, versus narrowing when you use a single molecular plant. Now, what they don't get is that, and this is true for cannabis as well, because we have the isolates in cannabis. Those molecules are what we call promiscuous, right? They work on numerous receptors, not just the classical definition of the CB1 and CB2. So when you're using that single molecular medicine, you may be affecting a number of receptors that you don't realize you're touching, trying to hit one target, right? And the reason why cannabis is so much better, because it has those other components in there mitigating and quieting down some of those other aspects of what that plant can do. So when we talk about the endocannabinoid system, and we talk about why cannabis works on that system, THC modulates what one of our endocannabinoids called anandamide does. And it works on that, what we call the CB1 receptor. But it works on that CB1 receptor, and if you take too much, you get the awful side effects. That's a single molecule that you're using. But if you use the broad full spectrum, you don't get those effects to the same degree. So that's the difference between using single molecule and a full spectrum product. You have multiple agents in this full spectrum quieting down some of the negative experience, versus one that just hits it with everything it has. And the further you get away from natural, for example, take Marinol or Sesamet, which are the isomers of THC. Those side effects are magnified 100 times, because it sits on that receptor so much longer than THC does, longer than our own endocannabinoid anandamide does. So the further you get away, the more you see.
So as I listen to you, it makes me think that the full spectrum plant, you have other things that create some kind of a feedback system where the receptor stimulated. When it's enough, then it'll pull back or remove it. So it polices itself, it controls itself, the full spectrum plant. Is that a way of thinking of it too?
Well, yes and no. The endocannabinoid system itself is a feedback loop, right? It turns off neurotransmitters when you're overworking, and we call that excitotoxicity. So, for example, you have a stimulus coming down that axon and releasing those neurotransmitters that travel across the synapse through the postsynaptic membrane. And there they stimulate the production of those endocannabinoids that then travel backwards to the presynaptic membrane where the CB1 and CB2 receptor sits, and say, turn off the signal, right? So that's what it does. So the endocannabinoid system is a negative feedback loop to modulate and control how neurotransmitters are released. Now, what cannabis does it mimics or acts the same way as our endocannabinoids. So we can do the same thing to turn off those receptors. But what you see in the full spectrum is sort of quieting down the effects that you see. Once again, remember, cannabis is natural, but it's not natural to the body. The body does not make cannabis. What it does, there's other things in that plant will sort of quiet down other things by not only modulating how it works at the CB1 receptors, but it's hitting other receptors like the serotonin or dopamine receptors that help quieten things down. Because you don't only have cannabinoids in that plant, you have terpenes, you have flavonoids, you have amino acids, and all of them are working together to present a certain picture. So that's why. So that's how it works. Now you may recall a couple of years ago where they had an unfortunate incident in France where they had used a synthetic FA molecule, which is actually the molecule that breaks down anandamide. They made a synthetic, and they were in their phase 1 clinical study, right? And they actually killed a couple of guys with this single molecule. And the reason why, because it worked everywhere. Now, what the endocannabinoid system does, when it makes its endocannabinoids, they're made locally and they're used locally. They're made on demand, made locally, and used locally. So my CB1 receptor in the gut is going to do something for the gut different than the CB1 receptor will do in the brain. So they're made upon demand. And when you put something into the body that came from the outside, it just works everywhere.
Gotcha. So there's an overstimulation. So if we look at the endocannabinoid system itself, we're going to put cannabis on one platform, looking at endocannabinoid system itself. And I remember from previous conversations, you've talked about stimulating endocannabinoid system. What are some of the natural things we can do in our lifestyle to appropriately enhance or stimulate endocannabinoid function?
And that's a beautiful question. And I love that question because that's what the science has taught us, to reunite the body from our spirituality to our physicality, right? The things that modulate that endocannabinoid system, it's just not cannabis. This is a bigger thing than cannabis. And when I'm talking to patients, I tell them, first off, your first medicine is always going to be the food you choose to eat. That's your first medicine. So you look at your nutrition first. What are you eating? That's the first thing. Sleep. How important is sleep to the body? Exercising, yoga, acupuncture, meditation. Those are important things. They all modulate that endocannabinoid system, moves it back toward health, right? So when I'm talking to patients in clinic, we start from the beginning. We talk about their food. We talk about their spirituality. We talk about their relationships, because all of them will modulate the endocannabinoid system. And I like using an example. If you put a Band-Aid on an injury to protect it, but dirt still get into that wound, how good is that Band-Aid? Not very effective. Well, the same thing with cannabis. You can use cannabis, but if the patient is still, eating poor foods, not getting sleep, always upset, angry, and stressors, you're still not helping that endocannabinoid system. So it is a reunification of everything about an individual and their spirituality, their physical needs, right? So it's the endocannabinoid system has taught us that we do really need to stop thinking of patients in silos. Stop thinking about the diabetic patient. Stop thinking about the heart disease patient, because all of them are controlled. Whatever disease process is going on is controlled by the endocannabinoid system. Now, these are the things that affect the endocannabinoid system: genetics, aging, pharmaceuticals, stressors in society, and the food we eat. Those are the things that affect the endocannabinoid system that throws it into dysfunction.
Greetings, I'm Dr. Batcha Montgomery. Thanks for joining us this evening. I want to share information about our FoodRx Healthy Lifestyle Series. The FoodRx Healthy Lifestyle Series is a comprehensive health and wellness coaching program designed to help you navigate your lifestyle towards optimal health. Do you want to reverse or control a chronic illness, or reduce or eliminate medications? You may want to avoid potential surgeries or medical procedures, or perhaps boost your immune system or improve your fitness level, or much more. The program starts with an intense 5-session, 4-week virtual coaching jumpstart phase, where you'll join a group of like-minded individuals dedicated to improving their health. You'll be provided a lot of support materials, including nutrition plans, recipes, supplement plans as needed, or fitness plans, and much more. You have full year access to the support materials as well as our health and wellness team during and at the completion of the 4-week Jumpstart period. To learn more about this program, connect on one of our links below or schedule a call with our team members. Let them know if you wish to speak to me directly and they'll arrange a time for you. Optimal health is a lifelong journey. Let us help you navigate it to your most desired destination.